Thank you for coming. This is amazing to talk about trauma on a Sunday, glorious Sunday, when there's everything else we could be doing right now. So I'm just going to start by acknowledging that the Montana Book Festival is taking place on Salish and Kalispel original land. So we're very grateful to be sharing the resources that we have here. My name is Barbie Beaton, and I'm the moderator of this panel, and kind of just, swimming my way through what's going on. So we have a reader who's going to start off by reading from her work that will soon be published in March. So that's exciting. We get to hear, first. So that's pretty cool. And then we'll get seated at our table up here. And I have a bunch of questions that I'm going to ask our panelists, Nicole and Barry. And if Sheryl shows up, she'll be here to answer too. So let's get started and listen to Alle, and then we'll get going. Thank you for coming.
I don't think I need I think you can hear me if I don't use this. Yeah. Okay, well, Okay, I'll see what I can do. I'm a little bit dramatic when I act things out, so it might go, woo, woo. So I'm Alle, initial C, Hall. I'm one of the short work reading series people, and this is a short piece that was actually taken. I adapted it from a novel that is coming out in March, and it was published in Tupelo Quarterly, the short story of it. So this is the short story of the novel, not the whole novel. Since I only have 10-15 minutes, I cut a lot, so there are things you need to know. So one, the main character, Carly, is an incest survivor. And the story starts, she's turning 18 years old. Having traveled for 5 months in Southeast Asia, she found that the lonely planet path of hookups, heat, alcohol, and drugs is a terrifying reality for her as a survivor. So she's traveling through Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, and her MO as a 17-year-old is to find some guy and trade drunken sex for protection, emotional and physical. And then all the while she's on a lookout for the next guy, because the guy she's with is going to want to do drugs at some point, and so she wants to stay safe. The final thing you need to know is at the top of Thailand, there's a place called the Golden Triangle, and so the northern part of Thailand runs into Burma and then into Laos. And that is where the story starts. We're at the Golden Triangle. It's 1989. Let me feel for you. Simon and I and our best friend as of yesterday, the Israeli Nadav, were in line for the overnight train tickets, tip-top of Thailand south to Bangkok. Simon wanted to skip Bangkok, just transfer straight through the train that would take us farther south. I pat through my pockets, no cigarettes, south to an island Simon talked about and Nadav might go to, Koh Phangan. I decide not to think about Simon's reasons for going to Koh Phangan. I've already lectured him. Simon, do not mess with heroin. You mess with heroin in these countries, they hang you. No wonder I like to smoke. It burned. Between our group and the dimly lit ticket counter were a lean couple speaking German and a monk in a one-shouldered orange wrap. The monk looked like what my father would look like if my father were Thai and bald. I move away from the monk. Nadav, with his eyes like sex on the move, shook his pack so that out the top popped a single cigaria. That's what he calls a cigarette. My chin tilted as I took it, and Simon pretended not to notice because Simon is British, and British people are too British to call things out. Who is Simon anyway? Some guy I met 11 days ago on the bus north, trying to drop a coin into the Golden Triangle. All right, so now they've moved to Bangkok. It is already our 5th day in Bangkok. I'm at the drippy end of the afternoon rain, and I stood around pat, pat, pocket, pocket, under an awning leaking less and less water onto the corners of the wide Khao San Road and the more narrow Chakrapong Road. Chakrapong, let me feels for you, threats through my head on the high heels of a nicotine attack. No backpackers to bung from, and I'd left my spokes in the guest house. Happy birthday to me. Without a pack to whack against the heel of my hands, I have no clue what to do with my hands. I'm 18 years old today, and I have no clue what to do with my hands. What ho! 2 guys are straggling down the sidewalk. The lanky guy's t-shirt was drenched and the other, Mr. Peck's, doesn't bother with one. If either had that backpack or a rumpled exhaustion that said, well, that was 14 hours on the overnight bus, I trade information, guest houses, and places to stay for a cigarette. Plenty of times I wouldn't have to swap. White guys, man, they are a straightforward undertaking. Wink, got a smoke? That's how Nadav met me. Cigar, yeah? But no backpacks and straggling in the afternoon. That pair was straight from the whorehouses of Pat Pong, fuck them, but it still needed a smoke. The rain shook out its last. Relieved by the fresh air, I crossed a bridge, landing on a tree-studded Market Street. A man with a brisk air about him called out, "Noodles!" The next staff offered produce. A Barbie kink kimono paraded to the front. The person wearing it carried a pure white rat and batted his fan in time with his downcast eyes, blinkety blink. I stared down the pet's pink eyes. Does he dress to match his rat? "Hello, pretty girl, rambutan." He waved a radish bunch of fruit, each piece golf ball size with spiky red rinds. 10 baht. Then deftly but carefully peeling away the spiky stuff to offer the milky colored flesh. Peeling and fleshy flesh, asking where you from, where you go, where your husband. I'm not married. He made the face they all make when I say I'm not married. Like they suddenly noticed I had a charred limb. The man from the noodle booth leans across. "He lady boy, you get? He lady boy." And he teased the lady boy in gumboot tie. The lady boy took a girly swing at the noodle man with his fan, but as he turned, blinkety blink, he pulled me flash into his life. A lady boy because he didn't know how to be anything else. His fingernails and their stomachs, the fat old white men, when all he wanted to do was die. It was pulling, the string that pulled up, pulling my head off. I wouldn't let it. Slam. A 5 baht coin on the counter. I thunked hard enough to hurt my hand. "Pretty girl, you say 10 baht. Let me feel for you." Chakrapong. I'm back on that same corner, Khao and Chakrapong roads. The string tugs. "Stay here, birthday girl, look." Look at Khao Road. Backpackers, now vendors. Tug, no, stay. There were guys winkety-winking at me, guys to bum from. There were Tracy Chapman t-shirts and pirated David Bowie tapes. And Levi's, I can't breathe. Chakra Khan, I can't miss. Good day. It was a guy. A normal traveler guy, his shirt on and the whole thing. "Do you know a good guest house?" "Of course I know a good guest house." "Jalan Jaksa." "No." Jalan Jaksa was the backpacker area in Jakarta. Jakarta was 5 months ago. How did 5 months happen? I am disappearing. "Miss, can I bum a cigarette?" The string one. Bangkok air carries the tinge of coconut oil. Every day gets stickier than it starts out. The sidewalk felt hard against my feet. That's good. That meant the white space was clearing. I'd always gone north, Bali, Malaysia, Thailand, and here in Bangkok, I was doing what always worked. I got Simon, had a new guy lined up, golden tip-top triangle, but there was no more north. North of the Golden Triangle, Burma was open solely for day visits. To the east, Laos was closed completely. Where was I supposed to go next? Where was I supposed to go? South. So Carly, Nadav, and Simon go to the island of Koh Phangan, and on the boat they meet the Japanese-American woman, Ko Yamashita, and she is the first traveler Carly has met with an actual last name. Once they're on the island, Simon finds his heroin dealer and leaves Carly, who goes back to their hotel room later to find, as she says, things I instantly understood: a syringe, a belt, cotton balls dotted with blood, his puke. The string didn't even have to pull. I buy a fifth of whiskey, three quick gloves. I wasn't enough to stop him. 2 more. I wobble to the beach. A party comes into view. Maybe 100 travelers writhe to Bon Jovi, splashing phosphorescent water over each other in the shallows, and drinking and smoking a lot of hash on driftwood logs. There, Nadav coming toward me, checking. I'm good. He pulls me into the squirming human mash. Now, raucous Irish rock, the Pogues, batter away, all whoosh. And next, red, red wine. All the white people sing along. And to the next song, Marley! My hips and shoulders circle round and round. Noethe guides me into his chest. Do mushrooms with me. Bam. I'm back. He steered me to a quiet log where he fished a fold of paper from his pocket. They looked like regular old dried mushrooms. I hesitated for the barest moment before holding out my hand. Tastes like bitter wood. I wait for Technicolor cartoons. The beach. I took his hand. By the time we reached the narrow beach, the wind was so like feathers that each hair on my body clarified silver. I saw the stars. I could taste them. That wasn't me. I don't giggle. Noethe, can you taste the stars? Carly is tripping. He lifted me easily and swung me around, newlyweds on an imagined threshold, except there was no bed. Only sand, endless sea, endless sky, endless night. We fell all over each other near some rocks, half in, half out of our clothes. His mouth and skin were strange, delicious meat. With guys, this is where I started doing whatever would get the thing over with. But tonight I wanted sensation forever, to last and last so I could keep feeling Noethe on me and keep feeling the sand under me, every granule, as I ground up against him, up and up. He whispered, Carly, and over the brink I was riding, close, free-falling heat pulsed through my body, down my limbs, swirled into the last little tingles between my fingers. I couldn't believe it. I came too. I shoot above. It was not my 18-year-old body down there, a child, maybe 14 years old. I could barely see her skinny legs splayed under my father, flattening me. I couldn't breathe. I was above. I couldn't breathe. My father made me come down a tunnel, a trainload of shame smash. No one would ever make me come ever again. Carly, what? Noethe was trying to call me, saying it was the drugs. He was way bigger, but I was electric with the need to stop men. It was everything in the world to shove him away. Down the shore, a dip in the beach was a good reason to throw myself onto my stomach. Mom! I rolled over, stared into the sky, slipped through my fingers. I wanted to miss Mom, but I never did, not once. Not really. I must have passed out because I started from some dead zone to come into the black, softening into gray, into pink, blinkety-blink. Someone stood over me, troubled face, determined bones. Mom? She was Asian, that lady from the boat. She said, hey, are you okay? You're Carly, right? She sat on the sand, her arms draped over her bent knees, her back curved like a spoon. I could fall off the world. No one would even notice. I guess my thoughts were really loud because she said I would, Carly. I'm 18. Oh, Jesus. I was just a little kitten. More might spill out. My birthday, my father, did she just say, I believe you? The lady man, all the men, the mushrooms, the lady man. I am him, I said. I know I said that. And he is me. When I was finally totally silent, she watched me until her hand slid down her strong calves to reach her polished toes. Her gentle rocking ebbed into the part of my body left empty by the space of everything. I had never told anyone. So we don't end there. This piece is a little more on resilience. It's just a flash essay, very short. It's called Hong Kong, my 20s. The pungent smell drew me into a nothing special cornered shrine made of concrete. It would never be listed in The Lonely Planet. It was hung with red lanterns and banners. 15 or so coils of incense the size of bird cages dangled from the ceiling. The smoke could have choked an ox. I breathe in burnt intimacy. I didn't know much about intimacy. Sex, sure. Before leaving for Hong Kong, I undertook regular affirmations. I am having a wonderful traveler affair. In the early 80s, affirmations were to be chanted in the present tense 3 times per affirmation, staring straight into the mirror. I left the temple for the sweaty street, Countless crushing people demonstrated identifiable purpose, an after-hour squash to catch the train or the bus or the ferry, so like my routine this past year in Tokyo. No ferries, but loving Japan and hating everything about teaching except the salary that would afford me these next 2 months with nothing but my backpack in Asia. A friend planned to come with me, then her boyfriend wanted her stateside. It was one big, lonely planet. Though I did not go on to have a wonderful affair, the affair I did have was the best I could do. I could have had a V8. When my 2 months ended, I returned to the orderly numbness of myself in Tokyo. 2 years after that, 2 years of a life that appeared antithetical to a Western concept of progress. I spent a week feeling as if my brain were unbending. Finally, I woke from a dream, 1,000 fractured images of sexual abuse. I told my acupuncturist I don't want this to be my father. He said, whatever it's been, it's been. A different day, there were a lot of seemingly random days during this time. I sat on the grass in my favorite park, Kichijoji, sat in the weak sun that was stealing looks through the cherry blossoms. It was my father. People always want to know, how old were you? Did your mother know? From the time I woke from that dream, it would be 7 years of dark nights and ultimate faith before incest became merely the data of my childhood. The third question people always ask is, how did you get through it? They mean the abuse, I mean the years after surviving it. There's an old story. A disciple goes to the Buddha seeking the secret to happiness. The Buddha asks, did you eat today? Yes. Did you wash your bowl? Yes. Did you do a good job?
Is it on? Okay. We're just going to get our panelists up here, seated, and get going with talking about trauma, the big capital T, of course. So while they're getting situated up here, I'm just going to ramble and talk about myself a little bit. Okay, so my name is Barbie Beaton. I'm a Montana native and a creative nonfiction writer. I've been writing about my childhood trauma for about 8 years now. So I started a blog on my website, and I also am a blog contributor for PACES Connection. And that is an acronym for Positive and Adverse Childhood Experience Scores. So who's familiar with ACE scores? Let me just see a show of hands. Awesome. So ACE scores are, basically it stands for Adverse Childhood Experience, and then there's a small, easy test you can take that gives you your score. The higher your number, the worse your trauma, the worse your potential future and lifespan could be. So it's all related to health and, of course, quality of life. So anyway, PACES Connection is a community of it's an international community of people working to my words are all spilling inside my head everywhere. They want to incorporate trauma-informed practices in every element of society, from schools, medical places, just to be more concerned about our trauma communities. So I'll tell you a little bit about my trauma, and then we're going to pass the mics. And I'll have the panelists introduce themselves and a little bit about what they do. So my trauma is, as a child, I was the scapegoat of a very dysfunctional family. I have 2 sisters and a mother and a father. We're a full family. You know, on the outside, it looks like, whoa, they're so cool. They just, you know, have their happy little life. But on the inside, I was bullied every day. There was alcoholism in the home. There's physical violence, psychological violence, and I was the brunt of all of it. I took a lot of abuse. But no one could see because it looked so good from the outside. So anyway, that's why I started writing about my experience, because trauma is something that I found when I started sharing my story, people didn't believe me. And so this is where we get our gaslighting culture, and it's not fun. So yeah, that's essentially that. Oh, and I'm writing a memoir, so you can look forward to that in the future. It's a slow process. Okay, so next we're going to have Nicole speak, and then Barry, and we'll get going with the questions.
Hi, everybody. My name's Nicole Gomez. I think that, the first question is just an introduction and about the community of your advocacy. And so I am formerly the executive director of the Free Verse Writing Project, which maybe some of you are familiar with, but it's a nonprofit based in Missoula that provides creative writing and arts workshops to youth held in juvenile detention centers around Montana. And also we work with youth here at the St. Patrick's Adolescent Psychiatric Inpatient Unit. And there's actually quite a bit of overlap between those two communities, both being youth who are struggling with and have experienced a number of traumas, many of the same traumas, both the youth who are held in the facilities as well as the youth that we work with at St. Pat's have experienced struggle with substance use disorder, mental health struggles, and often score very highly on the ACEs metrics. So, and actually a number of the kids that we worked with at St. Pat's, we had previously encountered or encountered later again in the system. There was a little bit of a breakdown, which is fairly interesting and deeply unfortunate, that the youth who are, youth who are of color, adolescent boys specifically of color, tend to be diverted into the justice system, and adolescent girls who are struggling with or questioning gender identity tend to be, or queer girls tend to be directed into the psychiatric unit. So that being maybe the only one of the most, like, the key distinctions between the two different groups of youth, but in general, all of them have experienced trauma, and I think it's really important to keep in mind that being held against their will, both in terms of the criminal legal system, but also in the psychiatric unit, where many of them have been inducted against their will by parents or guardians. That experience of being held against their will is deeply traumatizing. So that's something that I'm here to speak about, particularly in that capacity, because we brought arts and creative writing workshops to these young people. And I am no longer the executive director of Free Verse, though still involved. I now work with Montana Women Vote, which is maybe an organization people here are familiar with, and I work on criminal legal reform. And so I still work with the system-impacted population, but is now expanded to include adults as well, and I still focus on capturing people's stories. I believe deeply in the impact and the power of storytelling, both to validate your own experience and to recognize the power that your story has, as well as to process your experiences, but also, I think, crucially, to connect with other people and to not only for the artist to feel less alone, but also for everybody out there who's reading those words to identify some of their own experiences with the person who's writing and sharing their story. And then for many of us who haven't experienced some of the traumas that the youth and incarcerated adults write about, to recognize and identify with the humanity they express in that. And I think that it's a really important part, especially when we're talking about a population which is by definition invisible, and particularly the youth. But youth and adults, these are folks who are behind walls, who are hidden from us, and particularly with the youth, because they are underage, they are literally invisible. We can't share their faces. We can't share their names. I think many people that go about our days, we don't think about the number of kids that are currently held in facilities across this state and how young they truly are. Montana doesn't have a minimum age for incarceration, so last year there were 62 kids under 10 who were held at facilities across the state, and I think I will pass the mic in a second because we'll get to more of these questions later. But I think that one of the things, an important form of advocacy is since we can't share their faces or their names, we can share their words and their stories. And I think it's a hugely important part of reminding everybody out there. This is something we did at the holidays, was write holiday cards to the kids who were held at some of the facilities we worked at. And there were, over 100 children that were held in facilities during the holidays. And that's something that, we don't think a lot about. And so trying to amplify their voices and share their stories as a way to push back against a system. Okay, so I will get on to the rest of it later. Barry.
I think I have one that
Sorry.
I'm amazed. Nicole, I've always just been worshipful of Nicole, and she deserves all the worship that I can give her. My name is Barry Maxwell. My intro is much less impactful. I came up here from Austin, Texas, where I'd spent several years homeless, and you will find that as I speak today, I will probably cuss, and I will probably not use best practice language. I was saying yesterday, I wish a poet would work with the social work folks to come up with better phrases than "I am a person experiencing houselessness." When I was homeless, I was fucking homeless. Period. So I tend to revert to that as far as our terms go, so forgive me if necessary. I always imagine someone in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting standing up and going, "Hi, I'm Barry. I'm a person experiencing alcohol abuse disorder." It's like, really? And I have a question for Barbie. Was it PACES with a P?
Yes.
Is that an org or?
It is an org, and yeah, they changed it originally from pieces to pieces because they were like, let's throw in the positive component of that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
missed it. What does the P stand for?
Positive, yeah.
Cool, because I want to look at that. I'm here, like I was saying, from Austin, Texas. I came up for the MFA program, and I finished that up just as the first lockdown came around. And for fear of unemployment, I decided to stay in school. And now I'm in the master's program for social work. So I'm working towards mashing up those two worlds a little bit. I'm lucky enough this year to do my practicum with the Missoula Writing Collaborative, and can sort of keep my fingers in various pies. I work with folks from the Poverello Center, the shelter here, and do a writing workshop for them, along with some Zoom people from the ones I did back in Austin. Anybody's welcome to come. It's usually 1 p.m. Sundays in the Ellingson room. I think it's one floor down. And that's essentially me.
Thank you. Okay, so we might have to do a speed version of this, trying to get through some questions. But my first question starts with typical scholarly fashion. We hear so much about trauma, and yet some people are not sure what it is because it's a very complex issue. One of my pet peeves is when I hear people use it very loosely, as in, "Oh my gosh, I'm so traumatized after I ran out of toilet paper in the house." It's like, sorry, but that's real. I'm just using that as a random example. Trauma is deep and painful, long-lasting, and it really deserves attention, which is why I wanted to do this panel. So here's some definitions. I just kind of, thought to look at them up. Merriam-Webster says, it's a deeply troubling or disturbing experience. The American Psychological Association definition is, trauma is a response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical sensations like headaches or trauma. The title of this panel, then, Trauma as Backbone, Strengthening Communities of Adversity with Creative Writing, has a double entendre, perhaps implying that trauma is a foundation that holds us upright, and yet it's something that people automatically think weakens us. So the question is, what is your opinion about these definitions, and what is your belief about what trauma does to the person? What is the impact? Does it strengthen us or does it weaken us?
It's a good question, and I have been thinking about it, and it's a hard question to answer. I think that a little bit of background on the traumas that the youth that I work with have experienced, because I think it's really important and relevant to this question. So 36% of youth, justice-involved youth in Montana have an ACEs score of 4 or more or higher, which has shown to make them, to increase the likelihood that they're going to struggle with social and emotional problems as they move forward, increases the likelihood that they're going to come into contact with one of these systems. And when you look at the traumas that they've experienced, Montana's justice-involved youth score much higher in the areas of emotional abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, parental loss. Actually, that's extremely high. 50% higher than the baseline ACEs study. Montana's incarcerated youth have experienced loss of a parent, whether to incarceration or to death. And that's something that they write about a lot. I've brought with me some of the publications of the kids' work that we make available that are here in the library. They're at Fact and Fiction. They're at bookstores around Montana. And if you pick up one of these, the number of times that the kids write about the loss of a mother, specifically a mother usually, and lament that they can't say goodbye or wanting to apologize to the loss of their mother, and realizing that they never can, and promising to do better for her, is really high. So many of them have experienced loss of a parent, substance abuse, mental illness. So all of these experiences have formed high rates of trauma among this community, but also there are other aspects of the trauma they've experienced. Exposure to group or community violence, poverty as trauma. Actually, also, this connects back to something that Barry, thank you so much for your praise, but the lived experience of being homeless is incredibly impactful. And so many of the youth that I work with write about being on the streets from a very young age, living in cars, hunger. I think if some of the common themes in their stories are loss of a parent, fear of abuse, usually by a step-parent or a boyfriend, and trying to numb their fears and numb their traumas through alcohol or drugs. And they also write about living on the streets, not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. Hunger is a very common theme, and is actually one of the ways that they first get involved with the system in the first place, is by stealing to feed themselves, or very likely to provide food for younger siblings because they've lost a primary caregiver, and often they step in as primary caregivers, and they can't work, so they get food however they can. They keep the lights on however they can. And so that experience of houselessness, of homelessness, of hunger, of bullying, of racism and discrimination, poor health, and then involvement with these systems, with the criminal and welfare justice systems. And then, of course, the isolation of incarceration. So all of these things are things that they struggle with. So to get back to Barbie's question, as far as something that holds us upright and also weakens us, on one hand, I think about these traumas, I mean, or any trauma, is something, it's like a wall that you push back against. And in that, it's like a tension that keeps you upright because you are pushing back against it and struggling to process it and to survive it. And in that way, it arguably makes you stronger. But on the other hand, the traumas I just listed, I also, they shouldn't exist. I don't want any kids to be hungry. I don't want any kids to not know where they're going to sleep at night or to be incarcerated because they're hungry. So I think when thinking about it as something that can form a foundation, possibly, but it's also not a foundation that I ever want, and I actively work towards eliminating. I don't want these things. So it's a complicated question to answer. Barry?
Thank you.
Yes, it is complicated. And I could not imagine being a child, either on your own, out on the street, or in the system, or suddenly being thrust into a position of having to take care of younger siblings. I guess I'm fortunate that I waited till I was all grown up to blow up my life. But as far as defining trauma itself, I take a little bit of issue with a definition that pins it down to one event. I can only use myself as an example. I mean, like, was the trauma the first night I slept under a bush on the street in downtown Austin? Or was it all the stuff that led up to that, which were, my own issues? I tend to believe that in many cases it can sort of be unnoticed and cumulative. Like, I look at myself now and I think, who am I? And I am so psychologically divorced from the person I was prior to experiencing homelessness that it literally is almost like someone else. And although being defined in that way, yes, I don't like to label people. I mean, my friends and I called ourselves residentially challenged, which I think is a genius phrase that I wish I could credit myself for. It was a really small-statured guy who called himself vertically challenged. Anyway, dark humor comes up in those situations. But my point is that I do think that many, many events can pile up on one another to equal anything as traumatic as a car crash or a death or whatever. And the fact that it kind of creeps up on you and you don't notice it until after the fact. The folks I've worked with doing creative writing in Austin and here write about their past, and it's almost as if they hadn't noticed how horrifying things were until they stop and really take a minute to look back at it and sort of re-experience it from a new perspective, either coming to terms with it while they're on the street or in the shelter system, or many of them still come to the workshops after they've found housing. And I've totally wandered away from the question, but help me out here, Barbie. Point me in a direction.
Definition of trauma.
Okay. I think I covered that.
No, and the whole point of this is to have a conversation about it, and there are so many components to trauma. It's easy to go off in one direction and then forget where did we go. So I had mentioned earlier when I was sharing a little bit about my story that it was difficult for me in the very beginning of facing my trauma because I had a hard time finding validation. People looked at me like with big eyes, like, what are you talking about? Because those memories were underground for so many years, I never talked about it, which is often the case with trauma. It isn't talked about. I'm going to skip the question about that typical reaction of dismissing or denying people about their stories, I think we can open the news every day and see a case for that. So we're going to skip to the next question, which will bring us closer to the creative writing component. So speaking of trauma is often perceived as taboo. Language covers a spectrum of power, from empowerment to erasure, because language is both a key component of society and a means of self-expression. In the book, The Conscious Mind, author Zoltan Torrey says, reality, the way the world is, defines what language, every language, must deliver. So, must is a powerful motive. People who have experienced trauma must share their story. It's living inside them and they feel so alone. And that first initial, I was abused sentence, or whatever the case may be, when it's not met with validation, it feels really defeating. So I forgot where I was headed here. So anyway, so language feels like a failure at that point in time. I can vouch for that. So can you speak to the idea of language and what is this process that we're trying to get, or let's say a trauma victim is trying to achieve? And then what does writing capture that speaking about trauma doesn't?
I'll go on this one. The people I've worked with and me and myself, there's something about the writing down of a thing. In one of my classes, we were watching a cognitive behavioral therapy session in a video, and the therapist gets up and writes down these points on the whiteboard. They could have very easily just have been spoken. And I thought, well, that's kind of ridiculous. He's not this teacher teaching this person about themselves. But on thinking about it again and being like told in class, it actually does make a difference. And it totally makes sense to me, because when you speak something, yes, you can make an impact. Your words fly away. You're often not in control exactly of what you're saying. You don't quite know what's going to come next. You don't know if you were clear. You don't know if you expressed what you need to express until it's too late. And I find that it's far more thoughtful a process to be able to sit down and write something out. And you want to be, wonderfully eloquent on the page and all that good writery stuff. But also, you face the facts, literally. At least in my case, I tend to write memoir and fiction based very tightly on my own life. So I can't really speak to the fictioneers amongst us. But I also think just the language and reality relationship, I am not sure that I have definitely not decided that I work either direction. Does language define your reality? Yes. Does reality define your language? Yes. And I'm coming to believe that, yes, your language can change your reality. So now I'm contradicting myself as a person experiencing contradictionness, and I appreciate the person first language, it's wonderful, but also sitting down and in my bios, I usually write something along the lines of, I was the bum under the bridge with a Four Loko. I was that guy. And to me, any other cushion around the language doesn't do its job. And it also makes me go, man, I'm so glad I'm not that person anymore.
Thanks, Ray. I was trying to make notes as Barbie was forming the question, because I think that when it comes to language and the must and the delivery of or writing about trauma on the page, I think that something that's really interesting or that is really important is that, especially when talking about the kids that I work with, there's so many misperceptions about incarcerated youth and justice-involved youth. There's so many misperceptions. You know, people think of bad kids or juvenile delinquents, bad apples, kids who can't be saved. You got to lock them up. Of course, there is obviously decades of propaganda around predatory nature of bad kids like this, and so I think that one of the really important parts about creative writing and writing in general and getting the kids to write their stories is that they have experienced so much of being dismissed by these labels, of having their narratives claimed for them, of nobody even asking them to tell their own stories, and that's also a part of the trauma, their experience with these organizations, authority figures, hierarchical structures in which they're just told what to do, told who they are, told what will happen to them, and no one's asking them to tell their own stories about what's happened to them and what has led them to do whatever it is that they've done. It's just, in a punitive system, they are punished for it. And so writing, allowing them to write, or offering them the opportunity to write and to tell their stories and then to amplify those voices, can push back on that narrative. I want to share just really briefly a short poem that a kid wrote, which I think speaks very much against those misperceptions of incarcerated youth, also as angry youth. He wrote, it's titled Fear, Anger, Pain, Exhaustion, Anxiety. Anger. I've lived with anger ever since I could feel emotion. It is like a brother. It gets me through the day. It helps me with my workouts, helps me deal with my narcissistic and abusive father, fuels me to wake up every day and deal with what's to come, drives me to the point of exhaustion when I work out. With it, it helps me deal with the pain and fear of this world. Without anger, I'd be a scared little boy, which I know I am. Right? Like that's, and so what happens is that, or what I've seen in the years of working with kids is that they write these stories and then we publish them or we just react to them. We're just there to listen, to ask, and they tell their stories and they increasingly gain control of their own narrative and the ability to tell their narrative, and they can see the impact of it. And one of the kids said in response to one day we were finishing a workshop, and I always thank the kids for their time, for trusting us, for sharing, for writing. And one kid just spoke up and he said, "You guys have given me the ability to show people who I am. I know now that I can tell people who I am, tell it like it is, that I'm not just a bad person, that I have a story to tell, and that I can touch people with my words, and that I am powerful."
I've got to step in and say the phrase, having their narratives claimed for them, it removes so much agency from anyone's voice. And if they cave to that without some sort of outlet, they may never have their own voice. Yeah. It's the way I'm seeing it. And that's a horrifying thing to inflict on anyone. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it goes back to that whole idea of seeking validation. It's not necessarily approval. It's just, yes, your reality is fucking real, and I hear that, and it sucks. And, that's all a person really needs to hear. Your reality is fucking real. Thank you. That's my MO. Barry, do you have any stories of in one of your writers that has, I found, memoir writers particularly because they're writing from their own experience, what pops up often are the patterns that we don't see in our, blind. We're blind to everything until we really write it down, and then we see these patterns, and it's like, oh, duh, okay, gives me something to focus on to change my life. But do you have any stories, Barry, of one of your clients using writing and having it be the key to a locked door?
I think, well, yes, I do. I have a favorite one. And it's not directly related to your question, but I could connect those dots. The locked door being simply stuck by one's own doing in a particular way of thinking or in a smaller world than you actually could inhabit. It was back in Austin, and I had just started the writing workshops there at the shelter where I had once lived. And there's a huge homeless population in Austin, in the multiple thousands. I think the last time there was like 2,500 known people experiencing homelessness there. Anyway, I normally had a pretty good group, pretty good sized group. I also had good coffee and like charcuterie to draw people in. Hey, Sheryl. We need a chair. Anyway, there was a fellow named Randy who was really fairly antagonistic to the whole process. He was there for the coffee, he was there for the food, and he was sitting there enduring everything just for their sake. That day I had taken in a prose poem centered around the task of a woman in her kitchen making tapioca pudding. And it gets very deep into the senses involved in the making of the pudding. Like it gets a little burned on the bottom and you scrape it off, and the sound of bubbles in pudding popping. If ever anybody has ever actually made pudding on the stove, you'll know what I'm talking about. And we get to the end of the thing, and it's only, a half a page. And Randy's just sitting there frowning, and it's like, why the fuck would anybody write about pudding? So I took that as a dare, and we sort of dismantled the thing, looking at the sound of the words, the way the woman was using imagery to describe her relationship with her husband and with her children. And after a good half hour of just sitting there and listening, antagonistic Randy decides, I get it, she's not fucking talking about pudding at all. And that was one of the days where I went home after the workshop, and it's like, man, this is what awesome feels like. Somebody's head just broke open and now understands metaphor. And it's like, oh, yes. So that's my favorite story.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. And Sheryl is here. Thank you, Sheryl. I'm going to give you the mic, but first, I'll get you caught up. So basically, I just asked Barry to share a story of when creative writing unlocked a door, or was the key to a locked door for one of his clients. And so Sheryl, everyone, works with kids. And so is there a time, Sheryl, when, I know you've done this for a long time, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then I want you to answer the question, if there was a time when one of the students broke open with the poetry that you teach, and then allowed it to impacted their lives in a very positive way.
I'm so sorry I was late. I'm mortified. But I guarantee I'll make it up to you. So I teach 4th and 5th grade, and I have for years through the Missoula Writing Collaborative. And so I'm going to read you some of the poems that my students write. These are 8 and 9-year-olds. And I have to advocate for keeping the ratio of counselors in the school as it is, or raising it, because we need them desperately. I have so many poems that I turn into the counselor, and the child gets to talk to someone. And so creative self-expression is the best birth of Expressing trauma, okay. I used to be a person. When I was a person, I had friends. Now I have friends who don't seem to care. I once had a good life, but now it's fear at any turn. I used to feel meaning, but now I feel weak and lonely. I used to be a nice kid without a care, but now I'm used as a weapon full of worry. I still try to be a person. Now I know it's impossible with a horrible life, and this is what is in my head right now. So he's 8. Could I just share poems? Yeah. Okay.
No rules here.
Oh, good. You know, that's what I like. I am from a place where fairy tales are only in books. You can read and hope, but it won't come true. I am from where my only friend is loneliness, where light is rare. I am from a place where happiness blooms on trees too high for my reach. I am from a world that nobody lives in. I am from a world of sadness. I am from a world where no one gets it. These are 4th graders who can't tell this to their immediate family members, maybe their grandma, but all of these children have these experiences and trauma, and poetry is the place it comes out. And I've had teachers say, well, why do you have them write such sad things? I said, I asked for, Christmas haiku. Yeah, I don't ask them. It's the place they can express and be real and be valued. Some things. Funny things will keep us all entertained. For example, some movies or fairy tales are fun. Sometimes the things we really experience are also fun. For example, when my evening was, he told this to my sister. Julka, I'll tell you a story. It was a kangaroo story. Julka asked when the story began, and what was that kangaroo? She answered, yes. And he continued, the kangaroo was walking, and Julka was suddenly shot. And Tato laughed and said, oh, but they didn't shoot her. And Julka said, but there was a gun. This laughed and continued, but the rest was no longer funny. Panic spreads over the body like a blanket of fear. Tears run frantically down like waves that taste of salt, running frantically looking for what is lost, hiding as if waiting for someone to jump out and scare you. Relief when someone has found you, like you are shedding the fear in your body like a cat. Once something is found, you hold it tight, like your life depends on it. All the fear that stayed since the shedding is squeezed out like a sponge when you squeeze the water out of it. Then you lose something else and the circle starts again. And one more. Okay. There are some that are so beautiful that I just have to, and then I'll stop. The sounds. The sound of my shadow trying to warn me that someone is behind me. The sound of the fear whispering in my ear, run, you want to hide, it will be fine. The sounds of my emotions, confused, scared, mad. The sound of pure nothingness, but my thoughts one after the other. In there it will never be silent. The sound of my heart racing, trying to run from a weary body as fear washes over me. The sound of listening to what you need.
Wow, these kids are amazing. Thank you so much. We have reached after the hour. So I want to just real quickly, before we head out, kind of kind of go into this call of action question because there's so much out there, and I am assuming that everyone here either has a need or a want to help support people with trauma in their own communities. Bringing creative writing has a huge impact on their lives. And so Sheryl is the founder of the Missoula Writing Collaborative. Yay! So that's always, and I'm on the board of the Writing Collaborative. So that's always an option. We can use any resources you care to give. Nicole, do you want to give people a heads up on how they can help?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, go out and find publications, the Freeverse publications at any of the places that I mentioned, online. Check out Freeverse online. Look for the words and the stories of incarcerated kids and adults, and spend some time with them. And I think I think it's cause for collective reflection on a system that is incarcerating kids who are doing the best they can to survive in a lot of cases. And then I think, seek out those voices, support Freeverse, find the stories of people who are incarcerated or who have been incarcerated, and then also vote. Right, we're about to head into the legislative session, and there are a lot of policies that are about to surface in Helena that are seeking to go backwards towards harsher sentencing and mandatory minimums, and a lot of punitive policies for crimes of poverty. And so pay attention, speak up, push back, vote for politicians who are in support of policies of decarceration.
I'll just say be willing to listen and do not dismiss anyone's voice or their being because of their station and positionality. And always be aware of what level of privilege you might enjoy. It's one of the things that keeps us apart, I believe, is believing we're normal and that could never happen to us, and also telling ourselves we're more wonderful than we actually are. We could be better.
Yes. Okay. I have asked the panelists to write an acrostic for the word spine. So we're going to do this really quickly and on a creative note. And I get to share my lack of creativity very first. I'm not a poet. Okay, so my acrostic for the word spine: stupendous people inspire natural expression. Okay, top that, guys. You did send me. Here, I'll go.
Who's got the happiest one? Mine's kind of grim. I want to get it out of the way. I don't want to end on it.
You want to go first? Then
I'll go.
I have a pretty happy one.
Awesome. Then cool. All right. I will like point whenever the letters pop up in here. Subtle death points, way stations and slow self-destruction, one's own sins, those of the fathers, the mothers, the siblings, the scars of social disdain, abandonment and shunning, all come home to roost. Companions on your shoulder whispering, there is no redemption. There are no patterns or paths to worth beyond street skills and dodgy hustles, the shitstorms and clusterfucks of another day above ground that's not such a good day at all, offering nothing to inspire hope, evoking only resignation in a psyche crushed by the inevitable grind. Nascent strengths rise alongside a shifting morality. If you're brave enough to steal what you can't obtain otherwise, be it the proverbial loaf of bread for a hungry child or padlocked epiphanies of value and worth, maybe you'll stand, stubbornly demanding a place in the world, owning the right to I am earned by its taking and hung on to with grim determination, refusing those who would deny you.
So, in the spirit of the mission of Freeverse to amplify youth voices, my acrostic is a selection of some of my favorite lines from their What do you do when you're all alone, but still keep striving for a better tomorrow? Pain, fight, play, cheat, laugh, cry, home, unwelcomed, homeless, up, down, left, right, good, bad. I am a child of Montana who chooses to be lost in the never-ending beauty of the world.
The acrostic spine, and I'll do the sign letters for each line. She thought she'd never have a chance, pinned like a butterfly until imagination never gave up, ever. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming here today. And if you have any questions for any of us, I'll speak for myself. I'm online. You will find me. Catch me after this panel or whatever. But yeah, I feel like we didn't have enough time for audience questions, so I feel really bad about that. But please get in touch with me or any of us, and yeah, we'll be happy to talk. Thank you for coming.